Newspapers and magazines are the embodiment of journalism. But sadly, print journalism is in deep trouble, and you can blame digital technology and the internet for that. But long before people raced to read about the news online, we used to enjoy reading the news from a newspaper. Not everyone values printed words anymore, but fortunately, one person did. From Michigan discovered a box made of wood in the closet, but she assumed it was nothing more than garbage. But as she sifted through a bunch of old documents, she discovered a hidden compartment. That's when it dawned on her. What she had in front of her was nothing less than a priceless treasure. Plain and simple. The woman shared her amazing discovery. She wrote, "Found a box in Grandpa's closet. To the untrained eye, it seemed like a plain wooden box with iron borders. It was very dusty too, which meant it hadn't been touched in a while. It was also possibly broken since it wasn't closed all the way. In any case, she chose to take a quick peek. It was unremarkable. On one side of the open box, there were a few pieces of old yellow paper which had been rolled up, but there was a shallow nook on the other side which she soon realized was empty, except for a few pieces of paper. She added, 'It's not a very good box,' but then she unrolled some of the scrolls and suddenly curiosity started getting the best of her. Family treasures. There was a badly torn high school diploma among the documents, which belonged to Grand Rapids Central High School. It was dated 1922, and the name of the student was Harry Gaines Messner. She assumed that this box contained some family documents, and she was right. She discovered her grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-uncle's high school diplomas. But there was even more inside the box. She soon realized that the compartment was removable after taking the diplomas out. After doing that, she found another paper stack at the bottom, but there didn't appear to be personal family documents like the others. Then it became obvious what they were, and she was extremely overjoyed. "Jack frickin' pot," the woman wrote. "They contained magazines and newspapers from decades ago, and they were full of information about major historical events, too." She was stunned by the incredible discovery as she spread them across her couch. Naturally, her excitement continued to grow more and more as she looked through each and every one of them. She found a Miami Herald newspaper supplement that was colorful and commemorated the bicentennial of the American Revolution, which occurred on July 4th, 1976. The cover included the American flag, a bald eagle, and a Declaration of Independence quote, which was written 200 years earlier. Now, the 1970s may come off as ancient, but the Michigan woman discovered newspapers that went further back in time than she had realized. There was a newspaper of the Detroit Times from August 6, 1945, which discussed the atomic bomb dropped in Hiroshima, Japan, an event that made a significant impact in the 20th century. In bold red letters, a subheadline read, "Turned steel buildings into gas." But at the time, no one knew the damage that the bomb had caused yet. She was also going to discover even more historical treasures as she continued searching. Dated April 15, 1865, was an issue of the New York Herald, which she figured was reprinted around 1880. Regardless, the copy was very old but in great condition. The event that it reported was shocking because it announced President Lincoln's assassination. It would be an understatement to say that this find was amazing. But the next thing she saw had another significance that was different from all the other finds. In a copy of the Detroit Free Press from June 30th, 1891, she found no major news stories. Someone had commented that in those days, people saved the newspaper that came out on the day of their wedding, which suggested that this newspaper could have contained the wedding date of her grandparents. The other newspapers and magazines gave her a new insight into events that occurred all over the world. One of the three newspapers from World War I mentioned the signing of the armistice on November 11, 1918, which declared the end of the war. The headline points out that Germany had no choice but to sign the drastic truce terms. The armistice included things like reparations and surrender, but didn't guarantee removing Germany's blockade or the freeing of German prisoners. Fortunately, another newspaper was a bit peppier. A Chicago Daily Tribune, dated from June 2, 1953, spoke of Elizabeth Windsor, who had become Queen of England after her father, George VI, passed away. A sketch of the newly appointed 27-year-old monarch was on the front page, along with news of major rainfall over a crowd of 250,000 at the Mall in Westminster. Sadly, a newspaper that was dated 10 years after that also talked about a tragic historical event. A copy of the Baltimore Sun, dated November 23, 1963, showed that her grandpa has spent time in Maryland. The newspaper discussed the murder of President John F. Kennedy and how Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as his replacement. The front page discussed how the world was left in mourning. Then she found another publication which talked about those events, but in a rather different light than the Baltimore Sun. A Life magazine dated 1966 showed the headline, "A Matter of Reasonable Doubt," followed by the subheadline, "Did Oswald Act Alone?" The magazine talked about the footage taken when Kennedy was shot while his motorcade was in Dallas. This suggested that people were already suspicious about the way officials had claimed things went down on that day. And it was reported by a reputable magazine, too. Other newspapers talked over how interesting the 60s had been. She found 3 newspapers dated July 20th, 1969, which included the Miami Herald, whose headline read, "Man Walks on the Moon." Neil Armstrong's famous line was also included, so she might not have found gold. The collection of newspapers and magazines which discussed major historical events were invaluable. Hopefully, she'll consider keeping the tradition and adding a few things of her own.